Right, we're back live with you tonight, John in Focus, and thanks for staying with us. Employment and Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi has called for urgency in the investigation of farm worker deaths in the Northern Cape, a farming town of Kakamas. According to medical experts, the deaths last week are related to heat stroke. And for more on this, we are now joined by Phumudzo, Maphaha, the acting inspection head in the Department of Labour. Phumudzo, good evening, and good to see you tonight here on In Focus. Let's begin here. The minister has sent his condolences, but secondly, he's called for an urgent investigation. Over and above that, pledged his support for the families. My initial question would be, is heat stroke or heat stroke related deaths and events a work-related injury for the purposes of claiming compensation?
Good evening to viewers at home, Labour Afrika Spembe. To answer your question, every death that happens in a workplace must be investigated. In particular, the death that has happened in Kakamas, mainly because the heat itself should have affected even workers that were outside the farming community. Now, the biggest question that we have, which is not yet answered, is why, in particular, the workers in the farming community in that area were affected. Because we haven't heard of any death that has happened outside the farming community. And as a result, in terms of Section 24 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, such deaths that happen in a working environment have to be investigated.
What if it is found then that those deaths and the levels of temperature that were experienced by the workers were due to the work environment and were work-related?
Look, the Occupational Health and Safety Act in terms of Section 8 requires the employer to conduct a risk assessment and ensure that the places without risk that can adversely affect the workers. And I need to make a special emphasis on this one in terms of environmental regulations, in terms of thermal requirements. The employer is required, again, to conduct a risk assessment and ensure that workers are not exposed to excessive heat. Or if they are exposed to a situation whereby, like in Kakamas, whereby it was 51 degrees, they have to take breaks in between, whereby in terms of the regulation, every person must take about 600 ml of water each and every hour. So as a result, we have to investigate whether these laws were followed to the letter.
Yeah. Are these laws that are strictly policed? In other words, these official rules of when employees can work in the heat and how they should be allowed to work, risk assessment, breaks, and so on and so forth, are they strictly policed?
Yes, they are strictly policed. In the area of Northern Cape alone, in the last financial year, we conducted 1,147 inspections, of which 760 of those farms were complying. But we have got 387 of those that were not complying. And out of those 387, obviously, we'll enter into a bargaining or negotiation with them. But looking into the prescript of the law, 104 of those were referred for prosecution. That is in the area of Northern Cape alone. If you were to look globally in South Africa, 17,291 inspections were conducted in the farming community, of which 14,000 were complying. But 3,000 of those, which is a worrying factor, were not complying. And 347 countrywide were referred for prosecution. That is last year alone in terms of adherence to the labor laws that we have. So indeed, on daily basis, our inspectors are going out there to ensure that there is compliance to these laws that we're talking about.
Yeah. So one of the things which I'm not sure whether are applicable in South Africa, but certainly are applicable in other countries, is that an employer must take measures to protect the workers and prepare something that is called a hot weather plan. Is that something that is required for employers in South Africa, and how do you check for that?
In terms of the section that I quoted, Section 8, whereby you have to draft a risk assessment for a workplace, as well as thermal requirements in terms of environmental regulation. An employer whereby you envisage that one of the risks can be hit, you have to make preparations for that and ensure that there are mitigating factors that are taken into consideration to counter against it. That may vary from hours of work, and also ensuring that employees, they stay hydrated.
Yeah. There is a sense from our conversation with the Farmers Association in the Northern Cape yesterday that we spoke to, that there is no level of elevated awareness or precaution as far as the employer is concerned when temperatures reach a particular level for them to institute these things. In fact, they're calling it a complete failure on the part of the employer, which means, to an extent, I don't know whether the stick is hard enough for them to pay attention.
Look, the Occupational Health and Safety Act that I'm referring to, it goes back as in 1993. The environmental regulations, they go back as in 1987. So these laws were there. The provisions were made to be there. But also it's very, very important that we shouldn't make assumption that maybe the laws were not followed. What is important is for the investigations to continue. As you are aware that we are conducting now our preliminary investigation. What is important is that those investigations, they continue, and where possible, if we can obtain toxicology reports, we will be able to analyze what caused this death, because what is really mind-boggling in the whole situation is that it affected only the workers in the farming community. We are not hearing of construction workers maybe in the vicinity that would have been affected. So that's why it's important for us to get these toxicology reports and also to check if indeed employers did adhere to this risk assessment measures and also the thermal requirements measure.
So that's why I'm emphasizing in my question to say, what happens when the employer negligence is proven? Do we have a worker compensation system that is in place?
There is a worker compensation system that is in place, that is already kicking in as we speak. However, what is even more important is that should it be proven that there was negligence on any one who's responsible in terms of the requirements of the law, the provisions of the law, the mighty of the law has to take its course. In other words, we have to, as the Department of Labour, conduct what we call an investigation in terms of Section 31. That can be followed by a Section 32 formal inquiry, whereby now we can make recommendations for prosecution to the National Prosecution Authority.
Yeah. We recently saw, for example, in the instance of the Enyobeni Tavern, how toxicology reports can take a long time to be released, but even if they are released in some instances, in fact, in this particular case, the families came on and said, we were not even given a hard copy. I'm not sure how far that process has actually gone up until this point. What is the timeline that you are working with as a Department of Labour as far as this investigation and those toxicology reports that you're looking for?
We are working closely with the Department of Health. I cannot give you certainly the time frame, but however, in this case, in the next 6 months, we should be able to come up with a report that indicates where could the wrongdoing be. It's very, very important that we obtain that toxicology report, because you would know that we would want to determine what could have caused such a dehydration so quickly, and to only the farm workers. There are a lot of elements in the toxicology report that may indicate to us why were those workers suffered the heat stroke as it happened in Kakamas.
Yeah. And what support are you currently offering to the families?
In terms of the Department of Labour in this situation, we've got the Workmen's Compensation Fund, which now has to kick in. And we also have the Unemployment Insurance Fund, which now has to kick in for the loved ones that will be left behind. And we will be doing the investigation in terms of occupational health and safety. So we've got 3 legislation that has to kick in now, and which has already started. That will be the compensation for employees, and then and those that were left behind, and also the Unemployment Insurance Fund, whilst we are doing investigation in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act.
Yeah, and is that process automatic, or is that process relying on whether or not the employer was making contributions?
That process is automatic. Should we reach a stage whereby we have a situation whereby an employer was not making a contribution, we do deal separately with an employer in a sense that they will have penalties to pay if they were not paying, and they will also have to face the mighty of the law as well as to why were they not paying that. But in this situation, I do not think that is the case, because that has not been brought to my attention and my interaction with the province as well. So what we have in place is that in terms of compensation and UIF, everything looks as if it was in terms of what we expected.
Yeah. Just for clarity, we are seemingly getting some conflicting reports on the actual number of those who succumbed in this particular instance. Is it 7 or is it 8?
So far, the last I received was 7. If there was any 8th one, I have not received that. Remember, I do not rely on the news agency per se. I'll have to get proof from the inspectors and other government agencies as such. So far, what I have in my disposal is 7 of those workers in the farming community.
All right. We appreciate your time, sir. And thank you very much for coming on and bringing that clarity for us. That is acting head of inspection at the Department of Labour there, Phumudzo Maphaha.